perfection and the mirror's reflection. I'm a dancing with myself when there's no one else inside, in the crowded lonely night. Well, I wait so long for my love vibration, and I'm dancing with myself, dancing with myself, dancing with myself. When there's nothing to lose and there's nothing to prove, but I'm dancing with myself.
In 1981, Billy Idol left his previous band, Generation X, and went solo. His first single was Dancing with Myself, a remix of a UK flop single he'd recorded with Generation X. But by changing the mix to accentuate the vocals and percussion, the new version was perfect for the newly launched MTV. He became one of the first rock stars popularized on the new channel. Dancing with Myself explored a lack of human connection. As Idol told Rolling Stone, the song is really about people being in a disenfranchised world where they're left bereft, dancing with their own reflections. Employees everywhere feel like they're disenfranchised and dancing with themselves when their leadership is impersonal and ineffective. Jevon Wooden is on a mission to change that. This week on Next in Queue, we discuss Jevon's transition out of information security, lessons from military leadership, connecting with diverse teams, the importance of human connection, building trust, and high performance versus toxic culture. Let's get to it.
Welcome to Next in Queue, the podcast for contact center and customer experience professionals. Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy 2 Vision. Eliminate blind spots and see right through every conversation with Happy 2 Vision. Learn more at happitu.com. Now, here's your host, Rob Dwyer.
Welcome. Another episode of Next in Queue. Today, I got Jevon Wooden in queue. Jevon, how are you?
Man, I'm feeling fantastic. Rob, how are you?
I am great. We're recording this on a Monday, and it's Monday night. See, I've got my Kansas City Chiefs action going on. So, as we record this, Chiefs are 7-0, undefeated, and I like to brag about that every now and then. So,
man, I'm an Eagles fan, so Chiefs still have a place where I'm just have the slight despise for them.
It's okay because, the Eagles have a Kelsey. They did up until this year. We have a Kelsey. Like, there's a little bit of symbiotic relationship going
coach,
on. Yeah,
didn't
exactly.
win for us, but he won for y'all a few times. So,
And yeah. So, but we're not talking about football today as much as we probably could. We could probably spend the whole hour talking about that, but that's not this podcast. That's some other podcast. Jevon, you're the CEO of the Bright Mind Consulting Group. You're a speaker, you're an author, you're a podcast host. You do all the things. You go out and talk to people about all kinds of things. And your background is in information security. And you could probably just make a career of dealing with information security, but you went a different direction. Tell us a little bit about that before we dive into our topic.
absolutely, man. Well, InfoSec pays well, and I got my master's in cyber, did all the things, got all the certs, but then I realized it just didn't feed my soul, man. It was actually draining me to do that day in and day out, right? For some, I'm looking around, they're passionate, they're fired up. They look at the latest tech and they're like, yes, I can't wait to play with this and see how it breaks. For me, I'm like, who cares? I realized that I cared more about people than ones and zeros or protecting the company's data, right? So I hopped into the people side. So now I focus on leveraging the power of emotional intelligence to improve leadership and organizational performance.
I love that. I love that. I know that you just spoke with Triad InfoSec. We just had Joshua on the show to talk about
Nice.
cybersecurity. And so I know that the two of you know each other, but I'm curious, when did this become a focus for you? Like, how long ago was it that you were just like, you know what, I need to switch gears?
Yeah, I started this organization, Bright Mind Consulting Group, in 2017, but I was still holding on to my job. And it really wasn't until I was laid off that I stopped playing with this, right? I was laid off in 2022. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going at this full force, right? Napoleon Hill says, you got to burn the bridges behind you so you can move forward. It just so happened that happened a little sooner than I wanted it to happen. But you know what? When I started doing that, things started happening. So it gets a little, shaky at times, but now the big mo, right? So
Yeah.
that's when I really realized that this was what I was supposed to be doing, because every time, I have that entrepreneurial thinking of, should I just go back to the job? Something great happens just to say, no, stay the course.
Well, certainly someone else lit that fire, but you have marched ahead and really leaned into something that I know that you're passionate about. I'd like to explore, like, obviously, you were in the military, you were in the Army for a long time. Tell me about what you learned about emotional intelligence going back that far.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that really sparked this whole journey for me, being in the military, because when I look back at it, when I seen who was effective as a leader and who wasn't, who had high morale in their units, who could get people to just go charge hard for them without any complaints. It was really those leaders who led with empathy. Those leaders who said, you know what, I'm not going to demand that you do something. I'm going to show you that I'm willing to do it too. I'm willing to take action myself. I'm not going to put you in harm's way. I'm going to get your feedback to see how we can best do this. And it really, really gave everyone else a sense of ownership, which allowed them to perform at their best. So that was really the catalyst for where I am now. I initially thought it was mindset. I thought leaders with like a growth mindset, leaders who were curious, were really the catalyst for that. But it turns out it's a lot bigger than that. And that's why I started talking more about the emotional intelligence aspect, because it not only looks at the social side of things, but also the self side of things. How do you get to a point as a person where you can be vulnerable enough to say, I need help? Be vulnerable enough to admit when you're wrong. Be self-aware enough to pull something back if you say it wrong, right? There's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah, absolutely. It strikes me as a little bit counterintuitive to what the general, especially civilian public, thinks about the military and what they think about effective leadership in the military. And your experience paints a little bit different picture than I think most people would think about in kind of that typical command and control style of leadership, of which the military is, right? I mean, that is the leadership structure. What I hear you saying is the actual leaders and how they work within that structure makes an incredible difference in how the people on the team react to that leader and what they can accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the military is known for no fluff, hard charging, get it done type of attitude. Well, that didn't bode very well, right? So the military has had to change a lot of the culture, because a lot of people think war was really the highest cause of death. It was actually suicide for a lot of service members. So what they had to look at, like, what is the catalyst for this? Even people who've never deployed are, giving themselves to suicide and taking that route, or getting addicted to alcohol or drugs and all these other things. So it really had to do an about face to have the military terminology, and look at themselves to say, you know what we're doing, do we need to really operate in this manner? And when they looked at, holistically all the different service lines, they realized that the catalyst was that, like, we're not taking care of our people, right? We're breaking them down. We think we were building them up, but we're not. Like, what we're doing is we're desensitizing people. They're used to war. They're used to the offhanded jokes. They're used to being dark. They're used to not being able to share their emotions. And what you're doing is you're taking the human out of the person. So they had to really change how they operate when it comes to organizationally. So now you give leaders the license to lead for impact, but not lead with fear, right? And that's what it was before. It was like, oh, respect the rank. Listen to what I'm saying. Well, listen to what I'm telling you if it's a lawful order. Never mind if you have a better idea as a lower rank, right? Never mind that. We don't need to hear you. We're the leaders. We're going to operate in this vacuum. And we're going to give you these siloed orders, even though you know what's best, right? So they don't do that anymore. Now it's about, hey, let's get some feedback, right? Let's see what was working, see how we can improve. Everyone has a voice, right? At least in the good units. I'm sure there's still some, as in any organization, there's still some, dissent in there. But that's what had to change. You had to give people the agency to be heard, seen value. We hear it all the time, psychological safety. You had to give them space to do that. Now, of course, there's still a hierarchy in the military, but it's more about looking at the person as a person. You still go through basic training, you still go all through these things, but you become more effective because you're able to tap into what makes us different from a robot, which is emotions, right? Emotions have been given a bad rap, but it really is the first way we think, if you look at it, right? The emotional brain is hit first before we hit the cognitive brain in our thinking. So now that we recognize that, one, as a leader, you can say, hold on, right? Did I give myself space to really process what's going on? Two, did I get feedback on what's going on? Because I'm not there every day. I can't see everything. And three, am I allowing people the space to take ownership of what's about to take place? Right? Because those three are very important things if we want to succeed long term.
I love that you hit on us being emotional. We make decisions with our emotions. We think that we make decisions based off of facts and logic, information that we're processing logically. And the reality is we don't. We justify the decisions that we made emotionally using logic after the fact. Go, oh yeah, no, that was a good decision. But our initial reactions are very much controlled by emotions. It's interesting that you're seeing that change. Of course, you made a transition then into the private sector. So you've worked for a number of companies that people have heard of in the private sector. I'd like to understand, when you went into the private sector, did it feel like a big change in the leadership that you encountered? And if so, how was that different? And, how did you think about emotional intelligence as you entered into the private sector?
Yeah, I mean, the change in culture is stark, right? Between civilian side and military side, right? We just operate on a different frequency. That's just how it is. But that also allowed me to see things from a different lens. So, for instance, if someone in the civilian side is like, oh my God, they're waving their hands and they're going through because something happens, I'm typically more calm. I'm like, hold on a minute. Let's look at this from, let's calm down and let's see this, what we can actually do. Because one thing in the military that I always take with me is to stay flexible. There's so many things that we do not control. So we have to really place an interrupt, again, the emotions, right? Place an interrupt between our thoughts and our actions and our feelings so we can respond or react intelligently, right? So that's one thing that is different from the military versus the corporate side. The second thing is the corporate side. You hear a lot about, we're going to do this, but then it doesn't. In the military, it may take a little bit, but if the leader says, hey, this is how we're going to make this happen, they're going to plan it out, they're going to create the strategy, and then we're going to execute, right? And we're going to come back. If it didn't work how we wanted to, we're going to do an after action report, see what happened, what went well, what didn't, what we can sustain. We're going to go at it again. Corporate side really doesn't operate. They're like, oh, that's it. Well, we gave it a college try. And everything is siloed in the corporate side. So what that does is you prepare your whole life for this job for a lot of these larger organizations, but you're only doing one piece. And that is really where organizations are getting in trouble because they try to keep people in this one thing. And people want to be challenged. In the military, you're going to get challenged for sure. Corporate side, not so much. You know, in the interview, they tell you all these amazing things you're going to be doing. Then you get in there and you're like, what the hell is this? Right? This is not what I signed up for, man. So that, and then also from the perspective of promotional opportunities, military is tough, right? It's tough to get promoted because you're still vying for a certain amount of spots per year. But at least you know what you're going to supposed to be doing, right, to get that promotion. Corporate side, you have no idea what you need to do to get promoted. You know, you're like, okay, how do I move to that next level? Everyone's like, oh, just keep doing what you're doing, keep working at it. You know, like that doesn't tell me anything. So what I do in a lot of organizations now is like, hey, we need to give people an IDP, an individual development plan, not because they did something wrong, but so they know how they can move forward in their careers. And then another piece that is really different from corporate and military is how we go about doing things. In the militaries, there's doctrine on everything. Corporate side, no matter how young or old the company is, typically people are flying by the seat of their pants. They're like, oh, let's just see if this works, right? We're not documenting anything. There's no SOPs for the most part, right? So that's where also a lot of times you see people like two different departments doing the same thing because there's no clear lines of delineation, right? We don't know who does what, who's in charge of what in a lot of these. So that's why when I hear the comparisons between military and corporate, I'm like, I don't really like when they use the term like, oh, we're on the battlefield, we're doing this. I'm like, you're really not. It's completely different, but if that's what gets you motivated, we're going.
It reminds me a little bit of those commercials where Billy Idol is going in and saying, corporations, quit calling your people rock stars. Like, they're not rock stars. I'm a rock star, right?
Yeah. Oh, I have seen it.
Get
Yeah,
up on stage, right? And we make some of these comparisons, but I think this one is really important in that there's a whole different way of operating in the military, and there's a reason for that, right? It's got, in many ways, a longer history than any corporation in the United States. There have been lots of lessons learned, and it's a large organization, multiple organizations, but they have had to pivot, they've had to learn, they've had to grow, and because you have a constant influx of new people coming in, you need to have things documented. There are lots of organizations that could learn a lot from those processes and procedures, and like hey, let's just do some basic SOPs, right? As a writer of SOPs, right, it makes it really easy to transition certain things too. When you get new people in, you say like, look, this is how we do this thing. I don't have to worry about, did we talk about this? Did we not talk about it? Because you can look it up and it makes it really straightforward, like step by step. This is how we do this one thing. And most organizations, you're right, they're not there.
They don't have
they
that.
are flying by the seats of their pants, for sure.
It's pretty funny though, because we see these mythological companies and we're like, oh, they are amazing, they have it all together. But on the back end, it's not that at all. So that's a point that I really, it was good for me to go into these orgs and see that, because it's just like, I mean, we glorify so much of what we see, but we don't really know what's happening on the back end. So especially as an entrepreneur, it was good for me to see that even these companies who have been around for some hundreds of years are still trying to figure things out. And I feel like as people, entrepreneur, not professional, whatever you're doing, you can learn a lot from that to say, doesn't matter. There's always something to work on, and you have to be okay with that, right? You have to come from a place of curiosity if we are to elevate, right, to any level of success. So that's really what that taught me, was like, no matter what, from military to the corporate side, there's always things to work on, and you're always going to have to reinvent in some way, shape, or form.
One of the biggest challenges for leaders in organizations, even if they have been taught some leadership tactics, strategies, skills, which doesn't happen often enough, but let's assume they have. I think one of the biggest challenges is connecting with people that you don't just have a natural connection with, right? Sometimes that can be age-based, right? Maybe I'm a young leader. I might be in my early 20s, and somebody on my team is maybe as old as my mom or my dad, or maybe they just have a wildly different. Can you talk about some strategies and some tips about making connections with people that you don't just kind of naturally have that right off the bat connection with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something, I'm glad we're talking about this, Rob, because there's a lot of room for improvement here. One of the things, especially in the corporate space, one of the reasons why a lot of people struggle, leaders and employees alike, is they don't look for the personal common bond, right? They're like, oh, I'm a leader, right? It's lonely at the top. I need to speak to another leader. I need to do this. Doesn't really work that way, right? If you look for connection from a personal standpoint, like that's one of the things I work with a lot of organizations on, especially in a remote environment, is find something that you can talk to that person about. We're all humans, right? So we all have personal things going on, right? Does that person have family, right? What is that? Some of the hobbies that person likes. What even got them to this organization? Why do they stay? What motivates them? All those things open us up. That's a conversation starter. So once you find that conversation starter, it typically becomes a lot easier because one, people like to talk about themselves. So if I say, I just realized, Rob, we haven't really had the chance to connect. I'd love to just talk 15 minutes to learn more about you, not dealing with work, not any of that, but just about you. Is that cool? And then we get on that call. Like, yeah, thanks for meeting with me. Right. Well, I just realized, I didn't realize, do you have family members? Like, what made you come to Acme organization? Like, what keeps you wanting to be? Oh, you've been here for 3 years. What interests you? What keeps you motivated? Those questions are not just, they're a lot of people call it small talk. It's really huge, right? Especially if I'm your leader asking you these things, right? Because now I'm going to say, oh, my leader actually cares. And they're not just a manager, they're a leader, because manager is a position that's assigned, right? Position of authority. And you're worried about the processes, the day-to-day outcomes. Whereas a leader is about influence, right? I'm looking to get the best version of you that I can have out of every day so I can get the best results, right? And I'm being genuine about that. So you look and have that conversation, 15 minutes. You have just established rapport with that person, right? So it's that easy to just have these conversations. And I know a lot of people are going to say, I'm not really comfortable doing that. Well, there's Slack, there's Teams, there's all these different things that if you're more comfortable behind the keyboard, you can do the same thing. Like, hey, I just wanted to, don't want to take too much of your time, but I just wanted to say this, and this. And then they're going to respond back. So there's different ways to do it. And then from a team development standpoint, if you really want everyone to be on that same sheet of music, there's exercises to do it, right? There's a bunch of tools you can use to gamify the whole process. One of the things that I recommend with some of the organizations I have coached or consultant with is to have everyone put in a bucket, right? They like to do this hobby. They have 5 kids or whatever, and have everyone select who that person is, right? See if they can guess it, because it's fun. And then you get to see how much you really know about your coworkers. And then they can say, that's Rob, and that's Jevon. And you just find out so much about your people, and it's so fun. And then you remember those things. And next thing you know, you find some common things. Oh, you like hiking? So do I. Right? Oh, where do you live? I don't even know where you're at. So you get all this different conversation that really sparks the cohesiveness that is going to improve the results. And it's going to make people want to stay with your org because they realize that they're not just a number or filling a billet.
Yeah. I love that you delineated the difference between management and leadership there. That is really important for leaders and managers to understand, like, what am I doing right now? Am I
Mhm.
managing or am I leading? Because those are two vastly different things. And they work together often,
Absolutely.
right? I, as a manager, I need to lead, and as a leader, sometimes I need to manage. I also love that you're talking about or just taking time to get to know people. One of the things that I found effective in that process that you just illustrated is starting with yourself. And that can be hard for some leaders to kind of share about yourself first,
Mhm.
because if you just start bombarding someone with personal questions, they might back off really quickly of that. But when you start to share a little bit about yourself, kind of the things that you like to do, or hobbies, or about your family, what's important to you, what motivates you, those things can then transition very easily into having that
Absolutely.
conversation with the other person who all of a sudden goes, oh, okay, I kind of
Yeah.
understand what we're doing here. This is not like I'm not in trouble. It's not a coaching conversation or anything.
Right. And I will recommend you tell them why you're meeting with. You don't just want to put a meeting and there's no agenda, right? And you
Yeah.
can have fun. It would be like, hey, you're not in trouble. I just want to get to know you a little bit, right? You're on my team. We should know each other, you know.
Yeah.
So make it fun, man. Like we've lost the idea of fun and play, and curiosity, like all things that we had when we are children that we just don't tap into. We're too uptight. We just really need to, lean into that again, man. And I love that you mentioned like starting with self. When you're vulnerable, it gives people the agency to be vulnerable with.
Mm.
So I wholeheartedly agree.
So, Jevon, let's just play this out a little bit.
Let's do it.
I'd like to know something about you that maybe we wouldn't guess from just your background and the conversation that we've had. Like, in your spare time, when you're not talking about your passions around empathy and leadership and those kinds of things, like, what would I find Jevon doing on a Saturday or a Sunday when he's just making decisions for himself about how he wants to spend his time? What would you be doing?
Yeah, I love to spend time with my family. I have a beautiful wife. We hit a year September 30th, and I have a lovely daughter, who's about to turn one at the time of this recording, November 11th. So I love spending time with them. At the time of this recording, Halloween just passed, so we dressed up as the Flintstones, right? We had the baby
Nice.
Pebbles, wife is Wilma, and I was Fred, which was so fun. And then we like to, spend time working out, walking, going outside, spending time outdoors. And I have a dog his name is Hachi. He's 7, and that just fills me up. Right, spending time with all of them, playing, running around, being silly. Right, I mentioned play. We just like to have a good time, laugh, crack jokes, and just take things lightly. Life can be heavy, so that's my time to just lighten up. The other thing I love to do when I'm not just spending time with them is I love to learn. I love to read. I love to see things from different perspectives that I may not have readily been open to, right, or introduced to. So reading just takes me to those places, and I get to see, how these thought leaders come up with their ideas, or how someone who may have a different perspective from us, why they see it from that viewpoint. So those are the things I enjoy doing.
Yeah. Quick question. How much of the baby's trick or treat candy is actually dad's trick or treat candy?
Well, she's only one, so she can't eat any candy right now. You
Okay.
know?
Noted. Your non-answer is absolutely an answer. And those of us who know, we know.
Absolutely.
Um, and your favorite trick-or-treat candy to receive in your daughter's bucket or bag or whatever, what's dad gonna be eating?
Man, I love gummy candy, so like gummy bears and that type of stuff, like gummy bears,
Mm-hmm.
Skittles, all that. I love it. So that's why I
Okay.
gotta not have too much in the house, right?
Right.
I know that can go
I know that
poorly
feeling.
very quickly because I've been done ate all
Mhm.
of it.
Well, I've never found a Reese's anything pumpkin tree or just peanut butter cup that isn't going to end up down my gullet at one point or another.
I love it.
So you can have all the gummy candy. Maybe we need to
Hey,
arrange an exchange.
let's
My
do.
kids are old enough. They're not doing trick-or-treating though. So we're actually giving out the candy these days as opposed to collecting. So I don't have much for you if I'm
Well, at
being
least it
honest
makes
about
it
it.
out the door, right? Because you
Yeah.
could be one of those few parents that just open it up and take a couple. Next thing you know, there's nothing to give to the kids.
I had this giant bucket of candy. Now I just have a giant bucket of wrappers.
Right.
Um, can we talk about trust?
Yes, let's do it.
Let's
Let's
do
do
it.
it.
So obviously we've been talking about kind of that getting to know you and building a personal connection. But what does that have to do with trust, and why is trust important? Or maybe you're just going to tell me it's not important. Jevon, you just might say, Rob, trust overrated.
I'd be lying if I said that, Rob, because trust is really. If we don't have trust, one, no one's going to want to stay there for long. The performance is going to go down. They're going to always think that you have an agenda, right? That's out for them. So we really have to build that rapport. So it doesn't matter if I'm in a leadership role or if I'm just in the day to day, right? So we think about the relationships in our personal lives. We work a lot to build trust with people we care about, right? Or if we wanted someone to be our friend, right, we got to build that trust. So that in itself shows the importance of it. Because if we never get to that level where someone entrusts us with whatever they're thinking or entrust us to have their best interests at heart, what's going to happen is everything's going to be surface level. We're never going to get to their motivations, their fears, and their drivers. So in order to do that, we got to have these conversations, right? One. The second thing, we have to, like you said, give some of ourselves. We have to show that we trust them, right? Because everything is law of reciprocity. We give, typically, someone's going to give something back. They may not give to the level that we hope they do, but if we continue to show that we are someone who is trustworthy, and we don't erode that trust by saying something behind their back or doing something that's counter to what we said we do, then what happens over time is that person starts to show in whatever way they show that we are a person that they're looking to establish that relationship. And building rapport takes time, right? It takes a lot of time typically to build trust to that level where someone says, hey, you know what? I actually trust you with this thing, or I trust you with this secret that I'm going to tell you. It takes some time, but it doesn't take a lot of time to erode that. So we also have to be careful to maintain the trust once we get it. Again, trust is everything, right? If someone does not trust, then you're not going to get the best version of them in the professional perspective. And then from a personal standpoint, they're just going to say surface. They're going to say, how are you? And it's going to be the same answer, right? But if they do trust you and they don't feel well, they may say, actually, can I speak to you about something? And that's really the difference in a nutshell.
I love that you just talked about the difference between the words, which are the beginning of establishing trust, but the actions that follow along and support or don't support and can erode that trust. And it really is about the actions that we take after we started that process that are really going to tell that person, yes, Jevon is trustworthy, or nah, I don't trust this guy any farther than I can throw him. And it does erode much faster than you build it up.
Absolutely.
There is no question. It can happen like that.
Yeah. I've seen it, man. I remember I was assigned to lead a few soldiers, and I think it was my second deployment, and you always get a debrief. Like when you come into another unit, if you're a new leader, the old leadership will debrief you and, talk about the soldiers, strengths, weaknesses, whatever, right? Rooms for improvement. And I was told by their prior leadership that they just weren't good soldiers, that they didn't know their jobs, that they performed poorly, whatever it could be that could be told that was bad, right? I was told about these soldiers. But I found when I actually talked to those soldiers, right, I had one-on-ones with them just to see what their standpoint was, that they just didn't trust their leadership. Like they didn't feel supported. They didn't trust that they could say, hey, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, right? Can I get some training on this? Right. So without that, what happened was their performance plummeted because they couldn't come to the leaders and say, hey, I need help. They didn't know what to do, like as far as the physical fitness test. They didn't know how to train with themselves. There was no help in place, right? They didn't do PT together. So where are they going to go? They're just going to fail because all that trust is eroded. So I made it a mission of mine to really establish that trust and keep it. And the way I did it, it wasn't like I just was some amazing leader. It was just listening to them, right? I listened to them when they gave me feedback or when they said they needed support on something. I said, okay, what resources do you need? And I gave them that resource, right? It's really about taking ownership of their success. And it's really about being a person with integrity, which is one of the core tenets of the military. So don't know why the prior leadership didn't have integrity, but that's really a key component of what we're talking about with trust, is having integrity, doing the right thing when no one's looking, and then also looking to find what the right thing is to best support in the case of a leader.
You just really illustrated something that you touched on a little bit earlier, and that was having someone else's best interests at heart. Can you talk more about that and the relationship that has with trust, performance, and all of that?
Yeah, from my standpoint, it's like having someone's best interest at heart is really the definition of a leader. We mentioned earlier that leadership is influence. It's about that. Well, the difference between influence and manipulation is influence is leading toward a common goal, wanting that person to be the best version of themselves. Manipulation is just you trying to get what you can out of that person. So that's one. The second thing is when you have the person's best interest at heart, everything you do is genuine. People feel what's happening within you, right? So if you're just saying one thing and doing another thing, they're going to recognize that. And that's going to cause them to kind of back off. That's going to cause them, in the case of an organization, to start looking elsewhere. That's going to cause them to start talking about you behind your back because they can't see it, right? So it really doesn't benefit anyone for you to be someone who's selfish, for you to be someone who says one thing and does another, or for you to try to lead with fear. So it just pays for you to find like what that person's motivators, drivers, and fears, as we said before, and don't play on the fears, right? Try to support them so that they don't realize that fear, right? And then see if you can motivate and drive them based on the positive identifiers. And then that's what's going to really cause the cohesive unit to come together and perform at their best level.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about the leader, but I wonder if you have advice for someone who reports to a leader that leads through fear. What do I do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things, right? And there's, of course, escalation of force, as we call it. So the first thing is, are you comfortable enough to feel like you can talk to this person? Because you know what I've realized is a lot of people don't know what they're doing, right? And not from the case of they don't know what actions they need to take, but from the standpoint of they don't know that they're doing that thing, right? Because that's their personality type. Naturally, maybe they feel insecure, so they need to, feel like they got to be more assertive and things. So conversations should be the lowest level. Handle it at the lowest level if you can. Right? If you can go to that person and say, hey, you know what? I just want to talk to you because the thing you said in that meeting, didn't make me feel the best, right? Is it possible? And I like to use that term because it is possible typically. Is it possible for you to, say things differently or address me first before you say it to the group, right? If you can have that conversation, start there. If you don't feel like you can have that conversation, well, I typically don't like to blindside people with something, but if you don't feel like you can have that conversation, maybe you can find support, right, in another colleague, right? See if they're going through the same thing. See if they have that similar experience with that person. If they do, then maybe if it's a common theme, maybe it might be time to go one level up, right? You might have to do that. But I
Mm.
always recommend you start at that person. Give them a heads up that you're uncomfortable about something, or they're not coming at you the right way, or that's not the way to motivate you. It actually causes you to retreat a little bit. And then if you find some support in that, if there's a feedback system outside of surveys, because we know surveys don't really work, if there's a way to give feedback anonymously, that could be another way, right? If that leader has a 360 assessment going on or something like that, put it in there. Like, hey, you know what would be best if you stop leading with fear and you started leading with a little more care, thinking about the fact that we're people and we're adults, right? So those are different ways that you can do it. And then the other way is just to, if you've tried all those things, then you have to see what you can do. Can you move to a different department? Can you move organizations? Because clearly it's not going to work. And that's okay. It's not retreating or running. It's actually making sure that you have your own best interests, which is key.
Yeah. I love that intro of, is it possible?
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest challenges that people have with starting a potentially challenging conversation, and this certainly would fall under that umbrella, is how do I start?
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing I say to get us on this subject so we can really dig in? And having an opener like that is a great way to help people kind of practice in their mind how they're going to start this. So I love that. Is it possible? What other kind of high level things do you have suggestions for organizations today? Because I know you are you have been on the circuit like the last month or so, giving talks and talking to organizations. And I'm sure you're getting all kinds of questions about sometimes very specific things. So what kind of themes have you been running into that you'd like to, address here?
Yeah, you know what's interesting? This talk about high performers being toxic to the culture. I've been asked about that a ton. They're like, okay, this person is really, executing very well for me. They get the job done, but no one wants to work with them. And I see that theme over and over and over again. The leaders, the organization is afraid to lose them because they're a high contributor, but then they're losing everyone else. Right. So what do they do? And we could talk about this from an employee standpoint and then from the leader standpoint. So from the leader standpoint, what I've recommended is sometimes people when they're not challenged enough, they start to cause havoc a little bit, right? I had one of them in my soldiers. It wasn't that he had behavioral issues. It was that he just was not challenged. So he started finding ways to entertain himself, right? By being an ass, quite frankly. So what I did was I challenged him to lead. I gave him more responsibility. And everyone's like, why would you do that when he's clearly not ready? But no, he was ready. That's what he actually wanted. So it was something that really allowed him to step into a different thought process. It really forced him to tap into places he hadn't had, connect some synapses that weren't connected, right? So sometimes that's a great place to start on there, is to say, you know what? Clearly, you have time to cause havoc within our culture. What if we assigned you? What would you like to have that conversation? What would you like to be doing? It seems like you're not challenged enough, and we know you have all this. You have all this possibility within you. We believe in you, but we also need you to start treating everyone else better. So have that conversation because it lets them know, one, we're not going to put up with this anymore. Two, we believe that you have some skill sets that you haven't tapped into. So here's where we would like to see you be better. Here's what we want to see out of it. And then that sparks the ownership again. That starts to make them say, all right, let me take this seriously. These people want me to step up a little more. Do I feel comfortable? We don't have them commit wholeheartedly. Just say, hey, we'll try it for a little bit. and then see what happens. All right. So that gives them an opportunity to step in and do something different. The second thing is from an employee standpoint, if you have to work with this person, again, the conversation, and if they continue to do it, clearly the leader is in tune with that. Ask the leader, like, hey, is there a way that, we can kind of support this person? We know you just had this conversation with them. Clearly they know their job, but they're just not allowing us to perform at our level. Is there something that we can do about this? Is it possible to maybe put this person somewhere else? Or is it possible to have this person go to a training role so we know how to perform our job better? Whatever. But you always want to take that person and see if you can allow them to pour in some of the skill sets that make them a high performer into the other people. And that really gives them a sense of value, gives them a sense of pride, and it gives everyone else a sense of, hey, I can learn something from them, so I'm starting to feel better. Because oftentimes organizations typically pour more into those people who are causing problems more than they do, the people who really should be getting poured into. So that's one. The second thing that I would love to say, this from a personal standpoint, is don't wait for adversity to come to start thinking about what you're going to do when adversity is there. You should really start thinking about processes, having contingency plans in place within your mind. We call them tabletop exercises, but you can really role play things and visualize things in your mind. You can write it down. But think about, for instance, what would happen? How do I go about a disagreement with my spouse? Right? That's a key. If you think about those things from that level, when it comes to that emotional situation, the circumstance, you're not coming from emotion anymore because your mind has already gone through it. So you're coming from a cognitive, intelligent standpoint. So I recommend that everyone do that in adverse circumstances. Just think about what could happen and create that contingency plan to have it in place so you're not baffled or you're not shocked or you're not scrambling when a situation takes place. And you can take that to any circumstance in your life. That's the second thing that I would say.
Yeah, I love that. So, that really hits home for me. At Happy 2, we are going through SOC 2 certification right now, which I know you'll be very familiar with. And part of that is going through risk assessment exercises, right? This isn't necessarily emotional, but it is the same kind of thing where it's like, okay, let's put out a situation that we haven't experienced yet, a problematic situation. Like, how big is this problem? And what are we going to do about it if it rears its ugly head? And what kind of plans can we put in place to make sure that we can continue to operate at the level that we expect to operate? And this is almost like a risk analysis with interpersonal relationships, right? And that can be with all of your people and the different kinds of things that could potentially pop up. What kind of impact is that going to have? And how am I going to react if that happens? And if I think it's really likely to happen, like, what can I do now to mitigate the possibility of that happening in the future? Maybe I see that I've got someone who their performance is starting to dip. Going back to what you were talking about with a high performer, maybe I start to see the buds of that happening. What can I do now? And what plans can I put in place to make sure that this doesn't become a bigger problem? So I absolutely love that. And it really hits home with me right now. Fun times, risk analysis. Love it. Love it.
Yeah, I feel you on that one. I know I've had to go through a few of those in my day, so
I bet.
not the best thing.
One of the other things that you talked about that I want to just dig into a little bit for the listeners is, again, you talked about that high performer potentially creating a toxic environment. And I think too often we let high performers just do their thing because as a manager, they are impacting my numbers, right? They might be driving team success. And so you talked about a manager managing outcomes, right? And so I'm seeing team success. Like maybe they're a salesperson, they knock out the sales. And so my sales team looks good because they're performing at a high level. But when you understand what they need to be happy in their role, to drive them to show up for work every day, sometimes you get to a point where you're like, okay, I've mastered this. Like I can do this in my sleep and it doesn't excite me anymore. And so you're right. Understanding like, what do you want to do? How can I challenge you? That can not only fix an environment within a team, but help build trust with that individual who goes, Jevon sees me.
Yeah.
Jevon sees me. He sees that I'm a little bit bored. This isn't challenging anymore. Now we're talking about what I can do that's going to challenge me. And so I think it's critical that people recognize that when you see bad behavior, it may not be that someone just wants to be a pain in your ear. Maybe they're calling out and saying, hey, I'm bored.
Yep.
Just bored.
Yeah.
What can I do here? I want to do something that's exciting. What is it?
And that's it. And that's why it pays to really tap into the personal, right? To really get to know that person. Because then you can have that conversation like, yeah, I'm seeing you slip a little bit. What's going on? And it's not from a place of, well, I'm about to write you up, but from a place of, you're typically a high performer. I'm seeing that performance go down. Is everything all right? And you can comfortably have that conversation instead of waiting for it to be that time. And now they're looking like, oh, shoot, am I about to get written up or fired? Because that feeling is not comfortable. And that's why it also pays for you to put in the description what we're talking about. So don't wait for something bad to happen. Just check in. It doesn't take long, but it's really key to long-term success. And when you think about someone's job satisfaction has been shown as the main driver for organizational performance overall. So there's something called the theory of planned behavior by Isaac Algens. It's one of his premier frameworks that he created. And what it says when it's applied to the employee circumstance or to an organization is that attitudes being that individual, their beliefs, their behavioral patterns, their knowledge, all that stuff, that's only one component of what's happening. The second thing is the organizational culture. So what are they seeing, the social norms within that organization? What are you allowing in your organization? What are you, giving recognition to? What are you applauding? And then the third thing is meaningful work. So if their work is not meaningful, what happens is those other two are impacted. And you have to have all three. So you have to have the right person in place. You have to have a solid workplace culture, and you have to give people meaningful work. And when you have all three, your organizational performance skyrockets. So look at that from when you're talking to these people within your org. See if they're the right person first, because a lot of times we try to square peg into a round hole. Right? A lot of times we're like, oh, this person is a rock star, right? That's the time. But they're really not, because if you look at the costs that they're really ensuing on your organization from being toxic, they're causing everyone else to perform at a lower level. They're impacting, the morale of everyone. So they can't be worth it, no matter how well they perform.
Yeah, you should probably not be hiring Billy Idol into your HR department. I hope
not.
He is a rock star, but I don't know if he's going to be a good fit in your HR department. So
Right.
you should definitely be careful about that. Jevon, if people want to get in touch with you, whether that's for a speaking engagement or maybe they could use some help in their organization, or just want to chat with you like I'm doing right now, is LinkedIn the best place to do that?
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't just follow, connect, right? And then shoot me a message that says, hey, heard you on Next in Q. And then that way I know Rob, my friend, has has sent you my way, and then we can get the conversation going. Always looking to talk with great people.
I love that. I love that. Yes, absolutely. Tell him that you heard him on Next in Queue. Do that. And then tell me, like, just reach out to me and say, hey, I heard your conversation with Jevon. It was awesome. I reached out to him. I would love to hear about that and love to hear what happens after that. You guys know the drill. Go down to the show notes. You're going to see a link in there so you can connect with Jevon. Don't just follow, connect. Jevon, thank you so much for being on Next in Queue. I appreciate it.
Rob, thanks for having me. Fun conversation. Love what you have going on, man. So thanks for having me.
Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy To and is produced by me, Rob Dwyer. If you enjoy this podcast, please by all means subscribe and or rate this podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. But more importantly, please tell just one person about this podcast. Word of mouth is the best way for people to discover new content. As always, thanks for listening.